So welcome everybody to Chunking Instructional Content Effectively for Videos and Teaching. I'm Dr. Dina Kurzweil, the director of the ETI. Today you have Dr. Karen Marcellus and Mr. Brandon Henry presenting to you on this topic. Dr. Marcellus, take it away.
Thanks, Dina. Everyone, please take a moment to review the goals for today. And as you read them, think about how you usually organize your lecture content. So the way that you organize your content that you're presenting to your students can have an impact on their ability to learn and retain that content. Today, we're going to talk about a set of strategies for organizing instructional content. These strategies can be used in a variety of types of instructional material: videos, web pages, handouts, etc. However, there are some special considerations when applying these techniques for video lectures. We'll highlight some of those considerations throughout the presentation and focus on creating effective lecture videos towards the end of the session. Now, a moment ago, I asked you how you organize your instructional content. When you're preparing to teach, do you think about what you're teaching as one large block of time or as a series of smaller blocks of time that you use to get students to the desired endpoint? Chunking is an approach to organizing content that takes the latter method. Now, many of us probably do this automatically because we realize intuitively that it's easier to learn when complex content is broken down into smaller pieces. You know the old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. But when you think of instructional content, the term chunking refers to taking a systematic approach to how you break up your content. In order to help students learn, you want to break content up in a way that is meaningful so that related content is together. Content that is conceptually related is more meaningful than randomly organized information. And also, it should be broken up in a way that's logical. Each chunk should be clearly connected to what comes before and after it. You want to make inherent patterns and relationships within the content clear to your students. This enables them to build their framework of knowledge, which helps make it meaningful for them and allows them to retrieve the knowledge more easily when it is needed. Now, later on in the presentation, we'll talk about specific techniques to help you break up your content in a meaningful and logical way. First, just one quick note. When you think about chunking instructional content, you can really think about doing it at two different levels. The wider ranging level is the topic or content or conceptual level, when you have a topic that you want to cover and you have to think about how you should break it up. The smaller scale level is when you're presenting it in a visual format, slides or a website, for example, and you want to think about how to present it in that medium. So we will be focusing on the wider ranging conceptual level today. If you want to think about the smaller scale level, you may want to take a look at our Avoiding Death by PowerPoint brown bag. So, what are some benefits you can see of breaking up content into smaller segments? So, cognitive science tells us that breaking up instructional content into smaller chunks reduces the cognitive load on learners and thus aids in their processing of the information being presented. But there are a number of additional benefits to chunking and reasons to chunk content. One of the most important is that it is a way to maintain student attention. This is especially important with videos. There's a lot of research indicating that the optimal length for video is about 6 to 12 minutes. When researchers look at the usage statistics for videos in courses, they tend to see a huge drop-off after that time frame. Of course, it's important to realize that the complexity of the content is going to affect how long a video should be. For less complex content, you may want to aim for 2 to 5 minutes. And you want to make sure you don't cut out content that makes it meaningful just so that you can make it 12 minutes long. But if you do have a longer video, you should ensure that it's chunked into shorter sections and that you break up those sections by providing opportunities for students to engage with the content. Towards the end of this session, Branda will show you how to add chapter breaks and quiz questions using Panopto so that you can break up some longer content. Now, when you're in the classroom, you're obviously not going to have 6 to 12-minute lectures. However, you still want to keep student attention spans in mind and think about ways that you can break up your content to support the ways that you've chunked it. Students just aren't going to be able to focus and absorb the material if they're just sitting and listening to it for 45 minutes to an hour. So it's important to break them up by incorporating student engagement with the content a few times in the course of a lecture. In the classroom, you have a number of options available to you to do this. You can provide problems or questions that require them to apply the content in some way, either alone or in small groups. Or you can ask them to reflect on the material. Reflection on material is an important form of engagement, especially if you follow up with the students and have them explain their answers or explain their thoughts. Classroom assessment techniques can be especially effective for this type of quick hit student engagement. If you want to learn more about how to implement classroom assessment techniques, please take some time later to view our Alternative Assessments Brown Bag video. Chunking content can help enhance retention of information. Logically chunked content helps people to more efficiently process what is presented, they'll do in their working memory, and then to integrate new information into what is already known, what they have stored in their long-term memory. When they're able to process the information more efficiently, it increases retention of the information. As well, since engagement with an application of the content enhances retention, when you include opportunities for students to engage with the content before moving on to the next chunk of material, they're likely to retain more of what they've learned. Now, when you break longer content up into shorter chunks, you can update content more easily because you can update just a single chunk rather than the whole thing. This is especially helpful with videos. For example, if you have a lecture on the etiology, pathophysiology, and treatment of a condition, if you break it up into 3 different chunks of content, then if there's a new development in treatment, you would not have to re-record the entire lecture. You would only have to re-record the treatment chunk. That also makes it easier for you to modify the content for different audiences or to add enhanced information for students who might need it. So let's think about some other considerations when you're starting to try to chunk your material. First, keep the learner's knowledge level in mind. For more advanced learners, longer chunks are more appropriate. People with limited prior knowledge have less ability to process new information, so smaller chunks allow them to process a smaller amount at a time, which helps with the potential for overload, as someone mentioned in the chat earlier. When people have more prior knowledge, you can use larger chunks. Another thing to think about is the medium or type of presentation. So you would chunk differently for a live lecture than you would for a video, and your online materials would also be different from either of those. So for a video, as we said, you really want to stick with that 6 to 12 minute or shorter guideline. For a live lecture, you may be able to have slightly longer chunks, but you still want to try to incorporate some student engagement. And for an online presentation, people read at different speeds, so you can't really go by time, but you do want to try to use visual indicators to break up the content very clearly. And finally, consider the complexity of the material. So you may know the material, we hope you do, but your students do not. So the way you organize it will make a big difference to them. Think about your content from a student's perspective to help you create a logical flow of information. You may want to spread more complex material over a number of slides rather than presenting it on just one, and you may want to present it more slowly. Also, for complex content, try to make connections within the content clear and think about your transitions between content. So, we're going to take a look now at some specific organizational strategies that you can use if you want to explore chunking your content. This section of the presentation is based on an article from the eLearning Coach website. We've based the content here on the strategies presented in the article, but omitted a few in order to focus on the ones that seem most relevant to the USU environment. Feel free to copy the link and take a look at the article later if you want to see some additional strategies. So the content I'll be discussing to provide examples of the strategies will be in PowerPoint and online lessons. Once I've gone through all the strategies, we'll show you examples of how these strategies can be incorporated into videos by showing some excerpts from longer videos. So the first strategy I want to talk about is cause and effect. Chunking by cause and effect allows you to show the results after something occurs to set a chain of events in motion. This can be very good for showing anatomical functions, disease progression and treatment, etc. So I want to take a look here at a set of PowerPoints for a lecture on diabetic ketoacidosis, or DKA. Notice on the cover slide that this is part 2. So first piece of chunking is figuring out when you might want to break up your material. In preparation for recording in the recording studio, this faculty member broke up one 50-minute lecture into 3 shorter lectures by using a cause and effect structure. So part 1 provides some foundational information. You can see we've got some objectives, a little bit more information here, the pathophysiology, and then they move on to part 2, which is what you're seeing here, and that explains what causes DKA. And then part 3, which I'm not going to get into today, gets into the effects of DKA, discusses treatment, and then takes students through a case where they can apply what they've learned. So this faculty member broke their lecture up into 3 parts based on that cause and effect structure. Another useful strategy is simple to complex. Sometimes you need learners to master some preliminary content before they can take on more advanced material. In such cases, the simple to complex strategy can give them the foundation they need to master the more complex content. So you'll start with something a little more basic, and then you develop more complicated material that builds on it. You'll want to be sure to structure the presentation so you can take plenty of time with the more complex material. So now I want to show you another PowerPoint presentation that a faculty member worked on, but they used a simple to complex strategy to chunk their material. So in this lesson on the treatment of pain, the students have to have a firm grasp on the process of pain transmission in order to learn how and why different types of treatment can alleviate that pain. And you'll notice as we talk about chunking the material, the instructor has done a few things with the slides that reinforce the connections within and between chunks of content. First, if we look up here at the learning objectives, they may be a little small for you to read, but you see on the slides, there's along the side colored tabs, and they align with the learning objectives. So objective 1 is pain management. You can see the black bar on the slides that are visible here. 2 is pain transmission. You can see the blue pain transmission. So again, that reinforces for the students that this is a chunk of material, and it'll help them as they try to organize it for themselves as they review the slides after the lecture. Another thing to look at here is repeated images. So you can see the brain and the pain transmission structure, and the images are repeated. So here you see one in slide 7. If I scroll down, you'll see some similar graphics throughout the presentation. So again, the chunking gives students different types of content, but also shows them the connections between the content. So the connections, as I said, within and between content can be reinforced by some of the layout and structure of your slides, as well as the graphics you use. Another strategy is categorical organization. This can be used when content shares some elements or characteristics, but there's really no hierarchy or definitive order in which they need to be presented. You can simply create one chunk for each instance of that characteristic. For example, for a lesson on imaging, you might have a section about X-rays, sections about CT, etc. So let's take a look at an online lesson that uses this strategy. So this is a lesson that's presented online. You can see the structure looks very similar to a PowerPoint slide. And I'm going to show you the index so you can see some of the techniques that they use to chunk content. So first, you can see that there's a couple of different conditions. So you've got hypothermia, frostbite. Also, they tend to contain the same things. You've got some pathophysiology, the progression of frostbite. If we keep going, again, you move on to immersion foot, etiology, and clinical features, management and prevention. So again, the structure is categorical, and then within each category, you try to present similar items of information. So again, that helps reinforce the connections between the content while breaking it up into different categories. Also, this faculty member has used knowledge check questions to help break up the content and ensure that the students know about one set of material before they move on to the next. Another chunking strategy is the inherent structure. That's a strategy you can use when the content itself dictates an appropriate way to chunk it. For example, if you're talking about anatomical structures in the digestive system, you might want to talk about them in the order in which food travels through them. Or if you're talking about dates in a timeline, chronological order would make sense. Geography can also serve as an organizing principle. So I'll show you an example. Again, in this lesson, we use geography to organize it. This is actually a lesson that was used as a faculty guide for the Antietam staff walk. And it's used for faculty who are accompanying students on the walk to help them get to know the path and the material. It highlights stops along the walk and provides faculty with information about each of the stops. So you can see, as you might imagine, each of these numbers is a chunk of content. So if I click this one, you can see there's some key points for the faculty member to keep in mind, and then some details about what they're doing and what they're seeing each time. So that chunk of content contains that information. They can go through the entire path with a little bit of information each time. So we used the inherent structure to organize the content in this lesson. Another very useful way to organize content is in a sequential fashion. So if your topic is a process or a procedure in which steps need to happen in order, sequential organization and chunking can be very effective. You have to have clear segments and breaking points. I'll show you another online lesson that's organized in this way. So here you see a lesson on child development, which, as you can imagine, is nicely organized sequentially. So we'll take a look at the table of contents, and it has a very clear progression: 1 week old, 2 months old, 4 months old, etc. This chunk is actually chunked into 2 larger chunks, and then each chunk is broken into smaller. You see all these very short segments of time. That's because the first 24 months focuses on the development of gross motor, fine motor, language, and social skills. There's a number of phases covered and different amounts of time. Then if we scroll down, we go to 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old. There's still a lot going on, but not quite enough that they need a breakdown every few months or weeks. One other thing to notice is, again, if we go look at one of these pages, you can see the way that the content is organized. We have some video here to actually demonstrate this, but also gross motor, a list of gross motor, fine motor, social skills, etc. And then if we go back to one of the part 2 lessons, there too, you'll see a little bit of content with a video, gross motor, language, again, always trying to reinforce the structure and the information, and that helps the students to fit the distinctions between these different chunks within a structure that's already known, that is followed by all of the chunks of material. And here too, you also do see knowledge checks between chunks to, again, help the students engage with the content, make sure that they know the content fully before they move on to the next chunk. One last strategy that I want to talk to you about today is whole to parts. The whole to part strategy works especially well for content about systems or structures. You start off the presentation by providing a glimpse of the overarching system or structure, and then create a separate chunk for each subsystem within it. So for example, this image provides a lot of information. Trying to explain all of it at once while the image is visible could confuse the learners. You could show it at the beginning of a presentation and mention the different phases you will be exploring in depth, and then develop a chunk on each of those phases. And then the chunk would reinforce by showing a piece of that image and then talk about that specific piece. And then at the end, you might circle back and go to the big image again so that you reinforce the structure and the whole as well as the parts within it. So this slide shows you some of the chunking strategies we've been discussing. Are there any other strategies you use to organize your lecture content that we haven't discussed? So what I want to do now is show a video. We want to focus a little bit more on chunking in videos. I'm going to show you a video that shows video examples of these 5 different chunking strategies. This video will present the name and definition of the strategy and then show the example. The videos were created by the ETI team unless otherwise indicated. So the video begins with an example of cause and effect and then moves on to inherent structure, sequential, whole to parts, and alphabetical.
This energy can be described by 3 factors. The inertia of the bullet, which is related to its mass, the force generated by burning gunpowder that accelerates the bullet down the barrel of the weapon, and the time the force is applied, which is related to the length of the barrel. As the gunpowder in the cartridge burns, it creates a gas that is trapped between the cartridge casing and the tail of the bullet. This rapid burning, or deflagration, is what creates a gas in a confined space and forces the bullet from the weapon and what imparts the kinetic energy to that bullet.
There are several parts of the body that play a role in voice production. Vocal folds are 2 bands of tissue that are positioned opposite each other in the larynx. The larynx is located between the base of the tongue and the top of the passageway to the lungs, known as the trachea. When you are not speaking, the vocal folds are open so that you can breathe.
Identify the injection site by locating appropriate anatomic landmarks. First, locate the intertracheal notch. Next, visualize a horizontal line. Gently press the ear anteriorly. This will create a vertical crease. This intersection is the site for the injection. Inserting the needle here should allow it to pass posterior to the neck of the condyle and below the TMJ capsule. Start the injection process by cleaning the area with an alcohol wipe. Have the patient relax and open their jaw slightly. Position the needle at the previously identified site.
The heart is a hollow, muscular organ that receives blood via 2 large veins and propels it into 2 large arteries, the aorta and the pulmonary artery. The heart is composed of 4 chambers, 2 atria and 2 ventricles. The atria are receiving chambers and the ventricles are ejecting chambers. The heart is divided by 2 septum, the atrial and ventricular septum. These separate the heart into the right half and the left half.
Now that you've seen the video, I will go ahead and hand the mic to Brandon, who will talk a little bit about how you can create content for chunked videos and applying the concept to video.
So how do we get ready to apply these concepts to video? Well, planning is key, and it all starts with the objectives and the key points. To chunk effectively and prepare for an effective video, you really have to make sure that the objectives are clear and well defined. And it's really important to stick to those objectives so that you don't include content that's not relevant to those objectives. Once you have your objectives clearly identified, you can start thinking about supporting content. What are you going to say? Also consider some learning activities that you might add. Formal and informal assessment can let you and the learners know that they're attaining those objectives. And also think about how are they going to be introduced into the video? As you build your content, think about how you're going to transition from one piece to the next. What can you do to make it clear that one chunk ends and another begins? And what can you do to help the learners connect the new content with what they've already learned? You might consider the following types of content to use as your transitions. Things like questions for the students to answer, examples of the concept that you just discussed, or related content that illuminates an element that you just talked about. And finally, think about a theme or some sort of visual element. What kind of visual theme aligns with your content? And that might help you kind of organize your chunks as well. Before you begin recording, be sure to get your assets in place so that the recording goes smoothly. Make sure you have your notes, any graphics or images or videos that you want to show. And finally, the big thing is practice. Recording a lecture is very different from giving a lecture in front of a live audience. You don't get to see the audience reactions or be able to gauge whether the audience is following you or not. The atmosphere is really different too, especially if you're recording in the studio. There's a lot of equipment and lights. Given the unfamiliarity of the context, you really want to practice, because the more familiar you are with the content, the better the recording will go. And it also gives you a sense of how long your lecture is going to be, or your recording is going to be. So you can decide before the recording starts whether you need to add or remove material to keep it to a manageable length. So when you are preparing to record, you've got your content all nicely chunked out and your slides are ready to go. You'll need to make arrangements to either come into the studio or record yourself either in Panopto or Google Meets or Microsoft Teams or whatever program you're using. You're going to want to prepare yourself. The colors you wear will affect how your recording will look. You want to avoid busy patterns such as stripes or paisleys, because that really tends to vibrate on camera. Solid colors usually work the best. If you've worked out a theme with the studio technician beforehand, make sure to talk to him about what colors will be appropriate. Green on green screen is going to get you the invisible weatherman look, so you want to make sure that the colors go with what you're doing. You also want to avoid any kind of jewelry that's going to jingle or make noise. The microphones are really sensitive and will pick up any slight movement. So earrings, bracelets, necklaces that have, charms on them or whatever, you want to avoid that. If you're recording at home, you also want to adjust your space to consider the lighting and the camera angles. You want to avoid harsh lighting or harsh shadows. Try to get some soft lights if you have to bring a lamp into your desk area to help do that. And you also want to raise your laptop camera to about nose level. If you leave your laptop, if you're recording on Panopto or whatever, on the desk, you have that camera pointing right up your nose, and I don't think you want the nostril cam effect for your video. And finally, you want to schedule with the studio. You want to fill out a studio form, and there's also a studio guide on how to work in the green room when you're recording your videos. Now, once you get your video recorded, it's time to get it out to the students. And a couple questions you have to ask are, how are my students going to view the video? Is it a standalone video or it's going to be part of a Canvas course? And second, where do I actually store the video? So media in Canvas must be linked in Panopto. And I'll show you a little demo on that shortly. USYS does not have the space to store video directly in Canvas, and so you have to link it into Panopto, which is our streaming server. And please do not upload your own videos to YouTube, even if it's a private channel, without external affairs approval. When uploading to Panopto, it should go into a folder for the course and not your personal folder. I think the default, it may record your video to your personal folder, so you want to make sure to move that. And also that will make all the settings right for the students to view it. Most departments have a folder for the course, and if they don't, you might want to check with your course director. If not, you can contact the lecture capture team at USYS. Once you have a link to a video in Panopto, you can insert it into the slide or into your LMS, just like you would any other link. And when you add a link to a page in the LMS, be sure to add language before the link that provides context and helps the learners understand why they're viewing this video and what they're supposed to get out of it. That helps them keep their focus and makes it more likely that the video will serve its purpose. All right, so chunking, let's say you get your video in Panopto now. I'm going to do just a quick demo on how to add chapters and things to your Panopto demo. So now that you've recorded your lecture and uploaded it to Panopto, it's time to add markers or chapters, as they call them in Panopto, so that your viewers can easily navigate to the different sections of your video. To add markers, chapter markers, you'll click on the edit button, which is up the top right corner. You see a little pencil icon. And then you'll see sort of a timeline view down here at the bottom. So what you want to do is click on the contents if it's not already selected. These are clickable buttons here. And then you'll place your timeline marker wherever you want a chapter to be. So here we've got the first one. And then you just start typing in the box here. So I would call this introduction and hit the enter key or return key. And you'll see that it already puts time code automatically where I place my marker. Now you can go through your whole video and do that, or Panopto has a show smart chapters button, and I can easily just click this toggle switch and it adds automatically all of the chapter markers. I believe Panopto goes through and looks for major differences in your slides. And so if you have some with content titles on them, you can see how they kind of show up here automatically. And all of the time codes are here on the right-hand side. Now, if I wanted to add one earlier at 3 minutes, let's say I'll just put one right here, and I'm going to call it extra. If I hit the enter key, you can see that it automatically puts it up here at the top. So you don't have to try to drag it around. If you want to change the title for any of these, you can click on the 3 dots and click the edit button. If you want to remove them, you hit the delete key. And then that's a quick way to go through. And let's say you don't want all of these, you can go through and delete the ones that you don't want. And then this users can go in and just click if they've already seen your video or they only want to get certain information, they can go through and click your chapter markers. Another good way to create chunks or spots for your chunks is to create a quiz. And it's very similar to the way that you create chapter markers. Wherever you want your quiz to show up, you would move your timeline cursor down here. But let's just say I want to put a quiz here at 7-minute marker. I'm going to click on the quiz button. And then up here at the top, it says add a quiz. Click on that, and then we'll open a new window. And Panopto gives you the option of 4 types of questions that you can add. So you have true, false, multiple choice, multiple select, and fill in the blank. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'll just show you one example here. Is this true, false? And the answer is true. So we'll make true and then false. Forgive my capitalization. And then you can select the radio button for the correct answer. This is obviously true. If you want to add an explanation for the students to see after they've made their choice, you can add that down here. To add a second question, you can either click on add a question and continue, or you can click done. For time's sake, I'm just going to click done right now. And then it's going to take you to this window that has a few options, and they're fairly self-explanatory. Do you want to allow viewers to retake this quiz? Do you want to show the grade after taking this quiz? Allow review of the correct answers. Now, Panopto doesn't actually record grades or store them anywhere, so this is more like a, just kind of a general knowledge check to tell the user how many they got right out of their questions. The last checkbox, though, is I feel fairly important because you can block the advancement of your video until the user completes the quiz. Now, for the first time through, that might be something that you want, but if it's a user that's coming back to review information a second time, it's up to you if you want to block them and make them go through the quiz again, or if you just want to allow them to continue. So when you've made all the changes to your quiz, you want to make sure that you click the apply button. If you just back out of it, it won't save your changes. By clicking on apply, that will lock in your changes to your video. Click OK. And now we can see here I have not only my chapter markers, but I've also got my quiz here. So as the video is playing, once it gets to this part of the time code, it will automatically jump into the quiz. It'll minimize the video window and show the quiz. And down here at the bottom, after you've hit apply, it shows where all of your chapter markers are. So you can see the video is kind of playing through there. So as you can see, enhancing your chunk content with bookmarks and quizzes is fairly easy in Panopto. As mentioned earlier, if you run into any problems, you can always email the lecture capture team at USIS. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ben.
That wraps up the main content. Just to review a few key points and show you a few more examples. So, as we discussed at the beginning of the lesson, you want to present chunked content in such a way that the connections within and between sections are clear, and that gives learners opportunities to engage with the content as they are learning it. When you're creating a video, be sure to take time to plan your presentation carefully, organize your assets, and practice to make sure everything goes smoothly. So just a couple more examples and take a look at how chunking works on them. So here's a lesson, another online lesson that we developed on otitis media in the ear exam. Again, we'll take a look at the topic list. You can see it's organized into different parts with knowledge check. And this is organized using a simple to complex strategy, opening with foundational information, and then introducing a technique to use to interpret what you see through an otoscope, and then providing practice using that technique. On this screen, there's a video, and you can see it's introduced by talking about the purpose of the video, which is always important when you use video in your lessons. Then we talk about preparing the otoscope. There's a little icon here to tell people they need to stop and think. So again, these are some visual things you can use to help as you're chunking your content and using ways to engage your learners. Make sure to let them know what you're doing along the way. One last example to show you. This is an example of a lesson that's in Canvas. First off, one of the important things in a Canvas course that helps you to organize your content is the modules page. So this shows you very, very literally chunks of content. You can have a course introduction here. It allows you, Canvas will allow you to collapse all of the pieces. Now, this is a control for you, not for your students, but you can let your students know so they can see what the big chunks are, and then they can expand a chunk to see what goes into that chunk. Also within this lesson, as you've seen many times in the examples today, there's specific sections, overview and activities, with some pages, and all of the sections are going to have these chunks in them. So organize the content in a clear and regular way in your courses. Then it'll help your students get oriented to what they're doing and be able to find content easily and go in the organization that you provided for them. Now to take a look at a page within Canvas, as we mentioned, this is more the kind of the smaller scale chunking. Once you get into visual presentation, just one quick example of that, you can use titles, page titles, and headings within Canvas to show the different parts of the content. You can see some slides here presented within Canvas to break up the content in the chunks a little bit, some links, and then again, some headings and color will help students see the content and the chunks and break it up again into smaller parts to help them organize and retain that information more fully.
Here are the references we consulted while putting together this presentation. These images from the Noun project were used under a Creative Commons Attribution license, so we are acknowledging them here.
Thank you for watching today's Teaching with Technology Brown Bag session. You can view all Teaching with Technology brown bags on the USU YouTube channel under the full ETI playlist. Have a nice day.